Hello, and welcome to Tuesday. We are not your ordinary church. And tonight, we're going to have a good conversation. So, ask questions, toss them in the chat box. This is totally open forum. We will continue on with the subject, which tonight is preconception versus reality. But we welcome your questions, and that is really the purpose of us doing this in this fashion, is to give you an opportunity to ask questions, no holds bar. So, tonight, preconception versus reality. My wife was asking me what I meant by preconception. So just in case it's not plain, it's a conception before something happens. So it's like when something's happening, you have a perception of what's happening. You've talked about the difference between perception and perception and perspective. And in this case, preconception is your idea of what's or how something's going to turn out before it actually happens, right?
Yeah.
And so this is very, very connected, very linked to our last few podcasts in, vision and the idea of people following a vision and how people either buy into a vision or don't buy into a vision. And a lot of times what motivates those responses is a preconception of either possibility or too much risk. And so people weigh those things out. And then when reality hits, that's when everything is known, right? But before something happens, you just don't know how things are going to turn out. And I was actually inspired for this. I'm listening to a book right now. It's the biography of a CIA operative who was like a 25-year vet or something like that in the CIA, did like a whole bunch of black ops stuff. And one of the things he talked about was growing up and reading James Bond and dime novels about spies. And he was really interested in that kind of stuff. And he loved the thrill of the spy novel. And he said that when he finally became a CIA operative, he said his this is one of the very few cases in where the reality far exceeded his preconceived ideas or his preconception. And that's what kind of locked me onto this idea, because we develop preconceptions and preconceived ideas based off of a ton of things. And especially when it comes to God, you see this in scripture where the disciples had an idea of how things were going to turn out with Jesus. And Jesus comes to the disciples, they're fishing in a boat. He says, "Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men." And so this all links back to this idea of the leader having a vision and the men following it. But often Jesus and the disciples came to a place where Jesus is moving a direction and they were like, "What are you doing? Where are you going? This doesn't line up with what we expected to happen." As a matter of fact, many of the Jews, if not all the Jews, did not expect the Messiah to turn out the way Jesus turned out. And so this is kind of where I want to head, and I built all that up basically to just give a context. But when we naturally develop preconceived ideas, what do you think are some things that inspire the way we think and the way we create an expectation of events, people, circumstances, how things are going to play out? What influences that in our mind?
Well, mostly it's our past, with the things that we've experienced in our past. We are creatures of habit, and so we tend to believe that everything is going to happen the same way as something else that's happened previously. And so that's where the idea of these preconceptions comes from. But what the negative element of it is that a lot of our experiences in life they're not a good example of the way things are today. They're the past. They're like when we're a kid or things like that. And so there's different situations, different scenario, or different elements that are involved as time goes on. And so we expect certain things to be a certain way all the time, but that's not how life works. Mm-hmm. And so usually our preconceptions about how things are going to play out are usually wrong. We say they're right because we tailor them as we go along, moment by moment. And so we say, "Oh yeah, no, that turned out exactly the way I thought it did." Even though along the way you're going, "Oh yeah, well I thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, yeah, well that makes sense. Yep, see, it happened just like I thought it would." But it doesn't actually, and our preconceptions are usually wrong.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that that's like, what is it that leans us towards, I guess I'll call it personal reference versus, external evidences. And let me clarify, like you can base things off of what's happened to you in the past or what you've personally experienced. But when you look at the evidence in other people's scenarios, which have been very similar to yours, there's sometimes evidence completely to the contrary to your, that's something that works against your preconceived idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What is it that leans us towards no, this is what I've experienced, I'm going to hang on to that idea, versus, well, it worked out for this person or didn't work out for this person, and so I should think more about what they went through or what they did.
Yeah, a lot of that comes from just being self-oriented. Everything in life, we're the center of our own universe. And so what happens is we see everything through our eyes as if that was just simply life, that life is what happens through our eyes. And it's the same for everyone. And anybody who says it isn't is lying or pretending. And it's because of our selfish nature that we do that. You actually have to actively recognize that in yourself to actually do anything about it. Otherwise, that's just the way that we remain throughout our entire lives. And so, yeah, so we're because we're selfish, we filter everything that happens in life through self. And so anything that doesn't fit, we discard. Anything that is, if it's possible, we modify. And so we're constantly tailoring, moment by moment. If you think about it in the way of, video editing, that's kind of what we do moment by moment. We're editing life so that it looks the way we want it to look.
So what are maybe just give me some practical, we'll call them dangers in preconception, or even maybe just, disadvantages.
Well, I think the main thing of as far as the dangers of being, having that, preconceptions is, like I said, because by definition you're almost always wrong, or at very best you're partially wrong. It really detracts from what you could be experiencing in life. I think about the opportunities that I've had over the years. When I was growing up, up until I was 21 years old, I think I went to, 2 different states. I was living in California. We moved to Arizona. And one time I went on a really, really super long trip all around the world to Texas. And that was it. That was all I ever did, in life. And that going to Texas was like, wow, this is far. It seemed like we were driving for days, literally. But then from 21 on, as I started traveling the world, I was able to go to England and Spain and various other countries throughout Europe, and it's just very, very different. It's just very different. And so your life experience, when you are only focused on yourself, and thinking about yourself, it's like, well, why do I want to go to another country for? Another country is just going to be like here, just different things, So I'm going to travel over there. I'm going to see a bunch of stuff that, old buildings or whatever, who cares about any of that kind of stuff? And so that's where the problem lies, is that it really adversely affects your quality of life experience. You miss out on so much of life by only seeing life through your own eyes.
So, there's, like I said, this is really linked to a lot of our recent, the last few podcasts, but there's this, it's funny, I'm reading another book called Where Men Win Glory, about Pat Tillman. He was an NFL player,
Yeah.
but it builds all the way from his childhood. How these books go, but builds from his childhood and what kind of guy he was in high school. And it's really interesting because he actually talks about how there was this scenario that, so basically they're at a Round Table Pizza. It's like here in the Bay Area. That's Round Table Pizza, and they just won this their last seasonal football game, high school football game. He's like a star player on their team. He's a big guy. He's kind of got a reputation as being a tough guy, and basically one of his friends starts a fight with somebody outside, and so he talks smack to this other guy who's way bigger than him, and the guy just starts absolutely pummeling him. And the guy getting beat up, who started the fight, looks up and goes, "Hey, grab Pat." And so he's getting his butt whooped, and somebody runs inside, grabs this guy, Pat. He comes out with like 6 other football players. And when he comes out, he sees this whole scenario playing out. All he sees is his friend, who's smaller and has apparently some disability, getting absolutely destroyed. And so the second they look up, these guys that are, the offenders in his mind, they see Pat, they see all these other football players, they get up and they just start making a beeline to run and get away from him. But he picks the tallest guy because he figured that's obviously the biggest offender. And he runs for him and he hits him in the back of the head, knocks him out cold. Now, apparently this guy was not a fighter at all, and apparently wasn't involved in the fight at all, but he just happened to be with that group of guys, runs away. And as he's running, Pat catches him, knocks him down, and just starts absolutely destroying this guy. People are trying to pull him off. He breaks his teeth. He messes up his eyes. I mean, he really, really messed this guy up. And an off-duty cop breaks the whole thing off. Once the fight was broken up, he snaps out of it. Pat snaps out of it, out of this like bloodthirst rage. And then all of a sudden realizes what he did. And is apologizing like crazy, has no idea how to handle it. Now he's just got to deal with the consequences of this. And one of the comments that the writer makes is he said that, I can't remember, I wish I'd put it in my notes, but he says that this portion of his brain there was a whole sermon preached on this in a conference a few years ago, or a couple years ago, but about this adolescent part of the brain that hasn't developed that basically weighs out consequence. And so there's this like line that you cross at some point when you're able to walk out and just jump into a situation. Sometimes it works out good, sometimes it works out bad. But the fact that this guy was, the type of achiever that he was in the long run, he was able to kind of channel that in a direction. And the reason I'm bringing all that up is because on the one hand, you have people who, they don't weigh risk at all. They'll just jump into circumstances, and sometimes they just pay the price. But then you have other people who weigh every single decision and the possibilities in either direction. And my question is, how do you balance weighing risks versus your own fears and expectations? Because on the one hand, it's wise to weigh risks out. But on the other hand, you can just be totally motivated by fears of loss or fear of failure or fear of disappointment, all based on your past experiences. How do you get past that? What's the right balance here is what I'm asking.
Whoever this Kenny Life just chimed in, is that really is the issue. If all you have is a hammer, and problem looks like a neighbor when you see the world, and that's to the hammer, everything's a nail. And that whole concept, that whole idea is exactly what you're dealing with, is that whole idea of being having tunnel vision. Yeah. Is basically, and that's what you're talking about in this particular guy's situation. This guy's a fighter. He beats people up. He does that regularly. And so he's just weighing up the circumstances, jumping to conclusions because he's geared that way. And that really is the issue, and that is the problem, is that when we go back to the idea of preconception, is we're hardwired over the years. We're hardwired to act a certain way and to be a certain way. And it's funny because, especially people who, what are referred to as repeat backsliders, people who were in and out of church, in and out all the time, that's the thing, is they never get past that. They never get to a point in their lives where they're able to overcome anything. They just can constantly function off of default. It's always default, and it takes effort. You have to put a concerted effort into changing that, because
what is the thing you're changing though? Like, what is it, the thing that you're aiming at? Is it because if you just don't have preconceptions, then you just have no expectation either. Isn't that true?
No, not necessarily. You can have expectations without having preconceptions. It's not necessary that you have some kind of idea of how things are going to go. Mm-hmm. You work it out along the way. I heard over the years, I've heard the stereotypes about how men are. that men never ask for directions. I always ask for directions. The first thing I do,
never read instructions.
The first thing I do when I open something, like I got this bed frame the other day, and the first thing I did is look at the instructions and read it. And the reason is because I do those things because of the number of times that not doing that, how things turned out. And that's the issue of trying to put something together without the instructions, to realize that I put half an hour, 45 minutes into it, to realize I put it together wrong, and I have to take the whole thing apart, in order to fix it properly, or get lost in traveling around and making wrong turn after wrong turn after wrong turn, especially, in England, because the roads aren't like here where everything goes north, south, east, and west. The roads go every direction and in circles. And so if you don't stop and ask for directions, you're never going to get out. Because it's like being in a maze. And so I just learned, I used to be the kind of person that, there's always a way to get around traffic. There's always a way. There's another road to get around traffic, until I went to England. And then after getting out of traffic, trying to make my way around, going down back roads, to come back on, to basically be almost in the exact same spot I was before, and just wasted gas and time messing around just to be at the same place that I was. I realized, what? Sometimes there is no way out of this, and that's all there is to it. And so that's what you have to do, is you have to begin to see things from that perspective. It really comes down. My son Elliot really hit the nail on the head. We were talking about something, and I'd made a remark about a scenario that plays out the same way over and over again. And people that are involved doing the exact same thing. They always do, even though it always turns out wrong. And he says, why do people do that? Why is it that people are consistently and constantly wrong, but still they won't change? And I asked him, I said, so you were like that, because when he was younger, he didn't listen to me, ended up moving to Texas and stuff. And I said, so you know the answer to the question. How did you change? And he said, I got tired of getting hit in the head with a 2x4. He said, I just got tired of it. And he said, and I realized that if I would start listening, then I could learn. And if I start learning, then I can grow and I can get past these things. And that's exactly what began to happen, is he was able to get past those things because of that. And so that really is the issue, is that you're not changing a thing. You're changing, the idea, your perception of things, or your preconceptions of things. You just realize, what? How many times do I need to be wrong? When you realize that you're wrong about a thing, and you're wrong again, and you're wrong again, and you're wrong again, but there are commonalities in the scenarios, like it involves the same people or the same kinds of circumstances, and you're always wrong. It's time to realize that, what? You need to listen. You need to stop and listen and learn, because you're not progressing. And I think that's the real problem, is there's no progressing. And what a horrible way to live your life, to not progress.
There's a question, a couple comments here. What selfish habits do you have or can admit to?
Well, that's the interesting thing is I am willing to admit to them, except I'm willing to admit my faults. I should start that way. I'm willing to admit my faults, but just the nature of that question, what selfish habits do you have or can admit to? I would be willing to admit to all of them. Nothing comes to mind. And the reason is because I don't want to have selfish habits in my life, because they're negative things. They're not positive things. And so the idea of being selfish is a bad idea. It's not a good idea to be a selfish person. Life is much more enjoyable when you're not selfish. And so that's the thing is that if I have a selfish habit, I try to live life so that I can benefit. That would be my selfish habit, is I try to live life so that I can benefit from living life, doing whatever is necessary. But that's not a negative thing. That's a positive thing. It's like, it's a funny question because, because as I was reading it earlier, the question, I thought there are people that would say, well, I'm like this, and they would mention some kind of selfish habit. I do this kind of thing, and I know I shouldn't, but I do it. And it's a funny thing that people say that, and I've stopped saying that a long time ago because when you say, I know I shouldn't do something, well, what you're saying is either a lie. You don't really believe that. It's just the right thing to say in the audience that you're saying it, or you're just weird. I mean, stupid. Because you're like, I know I shouldn't do this. It's adversely affecting my life. Oh well, But so it's kind of silly to do that. And I'm reading a book right now that I'm hoping will help me to be able to, because a lot of these questions that are asked. Is you ask them and you say, well, how do you stop doing this, or how do you start doing that? And those kinds of questions are always questions that I think you just do it, if you just do it. But then I realized, this book I'm listening to right now, it's own your past, change your future. And what's interesting about it is his whole book is he spends most of the book trying to get people ready to change. He's like a cheerleader for change. The whole book's like, okay, so we're going to be talking about change soon, so get ready, kind of thing. And I know, and he even says, I know some of you, he says, I know you're not going to do these things, but I'm going to try to encourage you to do them because they're really, really good. But I know some of you won't. And I think, he's right. Some won't, a lot won't. And he actually mentions, it's a number of things that he's going to go through later on in the book from where I'm at. But he's saying that he says, few, if anybody, actually do these things that I'm going to tell you about. And he gave a summary of what they were. And it was really, it was change your thoughts, change your actions. And it was funny the way he said it, because it's true. I've seen it through personal experiences that it really is, for some people, it's really hard to change, to change your thoughts or to change your actions. Like, I want to change my actions. I don't know how. How do I change my actions, or how do I change my thoughts? And it's crazy, because I look at it and I think, that's crazy, because you just do it. In my experiences, you just do it. But from what I'm gathering from the book, is just really clear that there are some people that just literally don't know how. They just don't know how to change. They don't. And so I'm hoping to get some insight in there that might be helpful for that. But so that idea of selfish habits is, these are things. I'm 60 years old now. I've been changing since I was 21 years old. I've been constantly changing and trying to grow and change and become a different person. And my whole orientation of life has been change, become a better person than you were yesterday, not just 2 years or 10 years ago, but yesterday, be different. So
would you say it takes acknowledging you're selfish and a determination to change if you believe it's a bad thing?
Yeah, so that's part of the process that he's going through right now, and the part that I'm reading right now is because one of the difficulties about your past that people have with their past is the ability to accept it. Just say, it is what it is. It's this, I can't change my past, and this is what it is, rather than trying to excuse it or to use it as a stick to beat yourself with, or whatever, accolades, from the past, however you look at the things of your past, is it's your past, and you have to accept it for what it is, what it was, good or bad. And then you have to see it from reality. You can't see it from fantasy. You can't be looking at it from the way things that you like to remember things. But so that's so you have to acknowledge these issues, and it's not just raw determination. It's not like this just raw power to change. It's you have to understand how necessary change is. I think that's the thing that's the most critical. You got to, I like for me, when I hear and I read things about people, and you can tell they genuinely have benefited from doing these things. It's like, I'm going to do that because I want, I'm not going to say, oh, I can't do that, it's too hard, or I can't do it because of this reason or that reason. I'm going to do what I can to make that a reality, because it obviously, was very, very helpful for that individual. So it can help me as well.
Mm-hmm. Give me some examples of things in your past that influence, preconception.
Generally, or my own personal?
Either.
Oh, both. Okay. Because Because I think about, it's funny because I had done this in the past. I had looked at my past and realized, I could rewrite. Excuse me, I could rewrite my past, to be anything. I could rewrite my past. Thank you, everybody who's going to say in about 15 seconds. I could say, so my parents got divorced. I was, I was a kind of a, what was called a latchkey kid. Both my parents worked. And so I kind of raised myself, or was raised by babysitters that were only a couple of years older than me. And so, I could rewrite all that as to, and that's why I'm in jail. That's why I'm a criminal, is because I had these experiences in my past. And I could have written it all that way, but I didn't. I didn't write it that way. I wrote it as it was, especially after I had gotten saved. I just accepted my past as a reality because I was forgiven. I was forgiven from my past. And so because Jesus forgave me, I didn't have to think about my past anymore. And it's important to understand being forgiven of your past is a big thing. That's a very, very big thing that I don't think a lot of people understand, is that because in nearly every situation in life, how you process that, you're responsible for. Well, in every situation, you're responsible for how you process it. You're not responsible for what happened to you, but you are responsible how you frame it. And so we've framed many things in our past very, very wrongly. And being forgiven of our past allows us to just accept our past for what it really was, even if there were violations that were involved. We can accept it for what it was, and our mismanagement of what happened to us. And we can be forgiven of that, and we can start over. We can have a fresh start in Jesus, and that doesn't have to be our past anymore. And so I think it's very important to understand that whatever is in your past, can be, you can write it either way that you want to. So it's not so much that specific things in your past that are going to trigger certain things. It's how you handle it, because some people have had very, very traumatic experiences and it didn't do anything to them. But then other people have had not so traumatic experiences, and blam, their whole lives are turned upside down forever.
So maybe can you? Oh, we got another question. I'll go back to that.
Okay.
Well, what can be said to someone that immediately brings up all the good they do after being told they're still selfish? Should the good deed outweigh their selfishness, since they're not perfect? Yeah.
I'm not really a big fan on trying to answer a third party question. How do you handle idiots? Kind of question. I mean, that's basically I'm quoting that. I'm not saying I'm quoting that, because there's no real nothing really beneficial. But if we want to turn the situation around to ourselves, and to say, when I say, after all that I've done, all these years, all the good things that I've done, that should never outweigh some present bad deed. If I've done something I shouldn't have done, that shouldn't outweigh or be outweighed by all the good things that I've done in my past. That shouldn't be the case. Trying to, we should always be seeking to improve. In our lives, we should always be looking to be able to advance and improve.
Okay, so going back to what I was going to ask a minute ago, because you talked about forgiveness being a big thing. First off, how do you go about being forgiven for your sins? And then second off, how do you really explain that? How do you describe, the weight of being forgiven for your sins to the point where it overrides the way you think about your past versus the way God thinks about your past?
Well, the thought that jumps into my mind immediately is the Apostle Paul. Here's the Apostle Paul. He's been killing Christians. I mean, I don't think there can be a greater mental problem, from sin than that, because Other things in life, you can sort of undo, or at least apologize for, but you can't go up to somebody's husband or wife and go, I'm sorry, I killed your husband or wife. I didn't know what I was doing. And so there's a lot of, there would be a lot of room for regret, in something like that. But he was able to frame it properly by saying, I did it in ignorance. Once I met Jesus, I was forgiven, and I did it in ignorance. This was not something that I set out to, it's some kind of evil intent to do. And so the idea of forgiveness is really putting things in its proper perspective, from where it really is that when you're forgiven of it, it's something you can let go of. And I think that that's probably the hardest part that most people have, is because letting go means, for some people, it actually means letting go of their identity, because their identity is only in their past. It's funny, people get to be, when I was 30 years old, my wife had a over the hill party, and everybody dressed in black. And it was a surprise party.
For you?
Yeah, it was a surprise. It was
supposed to be a joke.
Well, the party was just a surprise party.
Yeah.
It was just 30 years old. And I was like, what's this mean? I knew the idea. I knew the over the hill and stuff like that, but I thought, man, I'm considered over the hill. And it's like, I'm hardly over. I'm only 30 years old. It's like, I'm not over the hill. It's like, but to a 20-year-old, I'm over the hill. To a 20-year-old, I'm really old. I was talking to a couple of kids. They're probably 17, 18 years old. And he said, oh, you know what? He said, this Jesus thing, he says, I'll probably deal with it, way, way, way later in life. Probably like, I don't know, when I'm 30. And I started laughing because I thought, and I told them, I said, at 16 years old, 30 seems a million years away. But, when you're 30, it doesn't seem like 16 was very far away. It is funny. And but the reason why I mentioned that idea is that for me, I'm still going forward, and I'm still living life at 30 years old. Well, I know people that at 30 years old, their lives are over, and they're now looking backwards from then, from their 20s or whatever, their teenage years. And now they're just looking backwards now. They're 35, 40 years old, and they're just looking backwards. Everything is just a backwards look, when I was this, and when I did that, when I did the other thing, and this happened to me, or that thing happened to me. And, and so their lives they're already, they're still very young, but they're already looking backwards. And that's where you get the regret and the bad preconceptions of life, is because it's not healthy to spend time in your past. I have like probably 30 pictures maybe of my entire existence. Because the only reason that I keep them is because they're of other people, and it's important to those other people. It's not that it's not important to me. It's just, it's the past, and there's nothing to look at. There's nothing to remember really, because I'm just going to be making it up. I'm not there anymore, and it was years ago, and so it's like the details of it are gone, and so I'm not gonna remember all that. And so that's I think, being forgiven of your past. The benefit and the blessing of that is just the mere fact that your past can be just that, your past. Mm-hmm. What has happened, not what is happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Is this idea unique to Christianity?
Partly. Yeah, I wouldn't say entirely, partly, because, people can learn of their own volition to forget their past and move on. But to know that I'm genuinely forgiven of my past, okay, because of Jesus, that Jesus forgave me, that carries a lot of weight. That I know when I stand before God, and I give an account to my life, that what happened before I was 21 years old, I'm not going to have to worry about. That's all stuff that's covered by His forgiveness. And the truth is that, there are things through our lives that we're forgiven of, but it's more difficult after you become a Christian. And it's also more difficult not being a Christian to forgive things, because you did them. And it's hard to rationalize that you were ignorant often. You you kind of, yeah, I was ignorant about it, but not entirely, and I knew what I was doing when I did it, and and those kinds of things. So it gives you, it makes it very difficult for you to let go of the past entirely. Where for me, it's gone. It's entirely gone. And there are the odd occasion where I'll have a memory of something from my past, but I immediately, or I remember it as that was before I became a Christian. And so it's like it's not even really relevant. And there'll be times where I might think, oh, if I would have made this decision back then, and kind of start to drift into replaying that, and I'll catch myself and I'll stop and I'll say, no, you can't replay this because it's not reality. There's nothing you can do to change your past. It's over. It's finished. And so it is, I think it is easier or more, maybe easier is not the word, but more full, as a Christian, the issue of your past and getting rid of your past through forgiveness.
So dig into that a little more, because we lived in this generation. I think you could justify saying this is a much more churched generation, especially in the United States, or maybe particularly in the United States, than a couple generations before. This is way. I think the idea would be way more common of people being Christians and doing things they knew were wrong. How do you deal with that? How do you work through that?
Yeah, I would say that right now, particularly right now, we're probably less church than we ever were before.
Okay, so we're starting to surpass that.
Well, I think it's the generation of the nuns, NONE. People who don't. Which for me is a relief, because I spent years of my life talking to people who are Christians, or their parents are Christians or whatever.
Maybe I'm just thinking and I'm over the hill.
You're coming from a Christian background and knowing people. That's kind of, you're kind of, that's maybe your just circle.
My particular environment.
Yeah, your circle of people.
So speak to that though. Talk about that idea. How do you deal with that?
Say it again.
You're talking about things that you've, a past that wasn't in ignorance.
Oh, okay. It's still your past, and I think that's the real issue is that because we're talking about the idea of preconceptions versus reality, and that's the big problem is the idea of reality. Mm-hmm. Reality is not our reality. That's our conceptions of things. Yeah. Reality is what life is, without our conceptions or preconceptions mixed into it. And so to actually experience reality, you have to understand that your past has to be your past in order to experience reality, because reality is present. It's a present situation. It's not a past situation. Reality isn't it rained yesterday. Just because it rained yesterday doesn't mean it's going to rain today. Mm-hmm. And so you can't use your past as a reference for what your present or your future is going to be like.
Yeah. And
that's very important to understand that, is that you cannot, yesterday may have been a bad day, but that does not mean tomorrow will be. It just simply means that you had a bad day yesterday, or a bad day today, whichever the case may be. And that's another thing I think is funny is people who say, "Oh yeah, I had a bad day today," and it's like, really, your whole day, your entire day was bad. I mean, from the time you got up all day long, I can understand an hour or two. I mean, the other day I was saying that, we were at the church doing stuff here at the church, and nothing was going right, and nothing had been going right in the projects that I was working on. The whole day I was chasing my tail the whole day and wasn't getting anywhere. And it's 2 or 3 hours, but it still wasn't. I didn't say, "Oh man, I had a really bad day." It's like this particular project didn't work, and that particular project didn't work, and it's wasted 4 hours of my life. But I didn't have a bad day. It was these. I had 2 bad projects, not a bad day. Mm-hmm. And so, why curse my entire day, for 2 bad projects, even though it did take up a good portion of my day. And so that's what I mean is that kind of thing is that you're not looking at your past, because that's the thing, isn't it? I had a bad day. You're talking past, but you're reframing it. You're reframing it in some negative way.
So, this is all still pretty related, but the idea, and I don't want to we can kind of move to the idea of expectation, which is what I wanted to where I wanted to go next. But this idea of preconception, everything you're talking about right now in dealing with your past, like you said in the very beginning, influences your perception.
Yeah.
And how things in your mind are going to turn out. And so, for instance, how do you get away from becoming the type of person who, oh, it rained yesterday, I better always bring my umbrella with me. Yeah. Just in case it rains again. Yeah. Where's the balance in that? That's what I was talking about, like the idea of weighing risk and all that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's just use that one scenario and play it out. It may have rained, it rained a little bit yesterday, not much, or Sunday, a little bit. So let's see, that's a real thing, but it didn't rain at all yesterday.
Did it?
Sunday?
Oh,
a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, no, it was very, very windy, and I think it rained just a little bit. While we were in service, and but it didn't rain Saturday. It didn't rain Friday. It didn't rain Thursday. Yeah. So the idea of carrying an umbrella, you have to realize, is that you've used the past in a negative way to frame a way of thinking. Mm-hmm. So now you have this preconception of weather. So that's what we're talking about, is you have this preconception of weather. You have this weather that says it rained 1 out of 5 days or 1 out of 10 days. It depends on how far you want to go back. We haven't had rain for a while, Mm-hmm. And so chances of me needing an umbrella are really thin, in reality. And see, that was what I was saying about reality. In reality, but you have to, reality cannot be your own personal experience. Reality has to be what reality is, not your own personal experience. And if for me, if I want to know whether or not I need to carry an umbrella, I go to the weather, go to AccuWeather. Yeah. Find out what AccuWeather has to say, because they're basing it on history. Yeah. They're basing it on real life data.
Yeah, patterns.
Yeah. And so the idea of there being rain, it coming up in the future is something that is predictable based on reality, not preconceptions. Mm. So you can look at past reality, not just past fabricated reality. That's just out of our own negative, thinking. It's like somebody who can, for example, it's that filtering thing that I talked about earlier. It's just, you can be looking back at your past, and all you see is the 1 or 2 things that you really hate about your past. But when you talk about it, you say, oh yeah, well, I've had a really bad past. Mm. But it was only an event here, an event there, and you've forgotten all the good events in between. You've forgotten all the beneficial things that have happened to you. You only focus on the 1 or 2 things. It's funny, you talk to people and you'd think, they're like in their 30s, 40s, talking about how horrible their life was in the past. You'd think they were in Auschwitz, because for like 5 years, the way they talk about it is like there was never a good day. I never had a good day. I woke up every morning and every morning, every day was a miserable day. If my parents weren't beating me, I was getting kicked out of school. And if I wasn't getting kicked out of school, I was getting bullied. And if I wasn't getting bullied, then my friends were abandoning me. And it's like, if we were actually able to go back and to really look at those things at a level of, moment by moment, we would find that probably happened. Those things did happen, but there was probably large periods of time in between where none of that was true. But we just forget all that. And because we, we're building a conception of how life is for us, which becomes a preconception that we use for the future, when we're trying to gauge things for tomorrow or today.
Okay, so let's talk about I have one more question, then we'll start thinking about expectation. But this idea of failure, why does failure or offense, why does it hit the mind so much harder than success or desires fulfilled? We'll just say that.
Why does failure hit us so hard?
Yeah. Why is that the thing that
Sorry.
you know?
I saw that. I just looked over and saw him yawning I thought it was off. I was off screen.
You asked the question while you were yawning.
I'm
That's
bored.
the trouble.
George's boring me. I'm just kidding.
Oh goodness. Yeah. Why is failure such a? It does. I mean, if you think about everything you're saying right now, this is like, so failure has a way of really influencing the way people move forward.
Well, that's a funny thing that you just mentioned, because you said it does. And to your original thing of, why does failure hit us so hard? It does. But it doesn't. That's not for everybody. And that's another one of these conception things or preconception things, is it doesn't for everybody. I welcome failure. I'm glad when I hit failure, because then I know what I need to improve on. It's, when you're running along, and you look behind you and there's nobody behind you, you don't know how well you're doing. You're just out there and you think, well, am I doing like really, really good? Or are they just around the last corner or whatever? And then all of a sudden you realize you didn't notice the runner to your, across your other shoulder, who's only 15 paces behind you. Well, you failed. That was a failure on your part to think you were so far ahead, and you really weren't as far ahead as you thought you were. And so now you look and you go, okay, now I know what I need to do. I need to put something into it. And so when you live life that way, then failure is actually a welcomed thing. It's not a thing of to be afraid or ashamed of. I think a lot of the reason why people are that way about failure is because they've had so much more failure in their lives than success. And I think that's probably why they dread failure, is because it's another failure. Oh no, not another failure. But it's not, it doesn't have to be that way. My recommendation for every person is the principle of low-hanging fruit. Get some victories in your life. Get some success in your life on a regular basis. You need to do things that you're going to be successful at. Do them, and then recognize the success, and then let those things drive you to try more difficult things. And once you get a string of success going in your life, when you have a failure, stop and say, I'm glad I failed. The last thing I want to do is be somebody that nobody wants to be around. I failed. And now I want to learn from this. How could I improve this? And then turn that failure into success. And if you start doing that in life, and stop looking at your past and your failures of your past, and stop, looking at things in your present as that you're going to fail. I was there was a funny thing that came up, and it actually came. This will be the first that I'm mentioning while you're here. It's not a bad thing, but I think it was just very, very interesting. We were sitting at a Cheesecake Factory, and we sat down, and we're all eating and stuff like that. But Elliot asked me this like really deep question, and so we're spending most of the night talking about this deep question. Mariah's sitting next to me, Celeste is on the other side, and I noticed they're not really talking about anything. And then you're on the other side, and you're talking with Adriana, your daughter. And so nobody's really engaged in conversation other than me and Elliot. And I was driving home, and I told Mariah, I said, I remember when I was a new convert, a newish convert, probably 3 or 4 years, that I went to a fellowship with a bunch of pastors, and they were talking about things I knew nothing about. I mean, I was way out of my league. And I said, and I remember very clearly sitting there and thinking to myself, I don't want my life to be like this. I want to be able to hang out with that kind of people. I want to be able to hang out with pastors and people who are older than me, because they're all older than me, and be able to be involved in the conversation. And so I began to read and to listen to audiobooks and start learning stuff. The only thing I really didn't ever really engage in was sports. I thought, I'm going to learn everything I can, about different things. So I learned a lot about the Bible. I learned a lot about various types of things that they were talking about. I learned about those things with the exception of sports, because I wasn't into sports. And so I found that in the future, when we would get together and we'd have these conversations, If this conversation went to sports for a little while, I'd be just kind of sit there and I'd think, I'd wait for the opportunity to swing it around to something that I had been reading up on that I knew they were interested in, and was able to swing it back, get back into conversation. And I said, I wondered, I thought, especially because you had paid for dinner for everybody, and I thought, man, that must have been a bit of a bummer as you decide you're going to have everybody go out with you to pay, and you end up paying, but not really talking with anybody. And I thought about that, and that's what triggered that thought in my mind about, my attitude was, I'm going to become that kind of person. It wasn't everybody at the table needed to appreciate the fact that I was the dumb guy, who couldn't get involved in the conversation. I had to actually tell myself, you're going to have to up your game if you want to play with the big boys, kind of a thing. And so that's that's a way of thinking that I think is very, very important. When we're talking about these ideas of preconceptions and things like that, especially when it comes to the issue of failure, is that I think that's a lot of how we see failure. Is we see failure as this big setback, rather than allowing failure to be something that actually drives you forward. And so failure can actually be a better friend than success.
Okay, we got a couple questions here. Isn't the emotional connection the trigger? You can remember emotions where you can't really remember the exact experience of physical pain. Isn't negative reinforcement a good deterrent?
It's funny that you mentioned that because the first part is true. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score, which just talks exactly about that. Your body already responds before your mind actually gets a chance to consolidate everything that you're thinking of. He talks about people who are, and I've been in situations like this where I've had a, when we were in a situation, years ago where we're paying a lot of money, we're paying a lot of money for stuff. It's very, very expensive. And I'm thinking, I don't know how much more I can pay. I feel like I'm at the end. And then I would get a letter like from the landlord. And I'd think, oh no, it's a rent increase, And so, but even before I would get to that, it's a rent increase, my body was already responding. I was already in a panic. I could feel it inside of me. I didn't want to read the letter because I knew what was going to be in it. That's that preconception thing. And so that idea of negative reinforcement, you need to be careful with that, because it will work against you in both directions, because either you will respond to this situation as you did in the past, or you will over-respond to the situation like you did in the past. You're trying to, I'm not going to be like this. And so but it never really works out. You really have to reframe the entire thing. So it's not just putting something in a negative reinforcement. You have to reframe the whole thing in a way that's going to help you. Like for me, the issue was, don't worry about money. That was the root. I had to deal with the issue of worrying about money, and once I was able to deal with the issue of worrying about money, then it wasn't so much of an issue.
I think there's a follow-up here, like you mentioned about the reading directions and reading directions and asking directions. So you don't keep making the same mistake.
Yeah, that is the key. That is the key. Is that for me, I don't want to make this. It's more important to me to not make the same mistakes over and over again than it is for me to have high self-esteem. And I think that's really where the breakdown is. Is people, we build up a way of thinking as a defense. And that's the problem. Is it becomes a defense for the bad in the world, that might come and get us. And so we've got this defense that we're all ready, because we're not going to do, like somebody, I don't need to ask for directions, only stupid people have to ask for directions. So, and the reason why does somebody think like that? Well, because they saw themselves as a stupid person. And so they're trying to defend themselves against being a stupid person, to prove to themselves they're not a stupid person. So they're just using those kinds of things because they feel good about themselves. Like, I didn't have to ask for directions. I did it all on my own. Well, if you did it all wrong, so what? but I did it on my own. It's better to do it wrong and do it on my own than it is to ask for directions. What do you mean? And do it right? So this is where all this comes from, is this idea of rescuing self.
So we should actually embrace failure, pretty much welcome it. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I do. I'm not trying to fail. Failure comes whether you want to or not. It's not something you really have to, go and find. It'll find you, no problem. But of course, I'll, like I said, it's 2 hours, 4 hours altogether working on this light system. Couldn't get it to work. But I never stopped. It was never a thing of, I quit, give up, forget it, I'm a failure. It was like, okay, well, I know what it isn't. It's like the whole idea of Thomas Edison and the light bulb. Don't you feel like giving up? You've failed 10,000 times trying to find the solution for a light bulb. And he said, no. He said, I found 10,000 different ways how not to make a light bulb. So that's 10,000 less mistakes I'm going to make again. And there really is a reality to thinking that way, to having that kind of thinking. And so, yeah, if you fail, I would say, for some people, this is, a lot of these kinds of things. I wasn't a fan of days gone by, but now I am, because the truth is that if you'll do it, it will help you. I don't need to do it, but it will help you if you do it. Next time you fail, stop and say, I failed. It's fantastic. Say that's fantastic, and start reprogramming your mind. Okay, so now I know not what to not do, or I know I should do. I know I shouldn't have done that, and so you okay. So I've learned something, and so now fix it. Like I bought this bed. It turned out to be a total piece of garbage. It's on Amazon, and it's a bed that looks like a kid's race car bed in real life. But when you look at it, it looks like when you look at it, it looks like this luxury bed, and it looks like a kid's race car. So I had to take it all apart today, and so I'm taking it all apart, and I put it together perfectly, absolutely perfectly. I was really surprised at myself at how well I put everything in the box. And so then I go to close up the box, and I realize that one of the flaps is tucked inside the box. And so I've got to I have to take the whole thing apart. And this thing's a million pieces. And so I was like, maybe I can work around it. Tried to pull it out. Couldn't just pull it out. Wouldn't come. It was deep inside of there. So I had to take all the pieces out. And so I decided, well, I don't want to take all the pieces out. So I reached down underneath the box and tried to pull the whole side up. And as I pulled the whole side up, I got to the flap. And just as I went to get the flap, everything just started falling everywhere. And I said, yes, isn't that great? We live in a imperfect world. I had this put together absolutely perfectly, but we live in an imperfect world. And so now this is exactly the way it's supposed to be. A mess. And I'm saying this stuff to myself, and I'm saying, yes, we live in a fallen world. I can't wait till one day to go to heaven, and get away from all this nonsense.
Was your wife home listening?
No, I was just doing this by myself. And so I'm really not happy with everything that's going on. So I get all this garbage back in the box, but it's nowhere near as perfect as it was before. And I looked at it and I thought, this is just the way things are. It's just reality. It's just how life is. Even when you do something, you think you did a great job. I'm patting myself on the back for doing a great job. The box is nice and square. There's a million pieces, I've got to send this back. And so it's in perfect shape. Now we take it in there. The box was more round than square, and all the things that I expected it to be like the first time around. But my point being in all that is that I'm gassing, I'm outgassing, I'm letting off some steam as I'm doing this. I'm not throwing a fit or anything like that. I'm joking with myself about the whole thing. I'm just laughing about it. I'm joking with myself about it. But it's a fail. I mean, it's a sheer fail. There's no two ways about it. But I don't look at it and go, you always fail. Everything you do is a failure. You can't even put a bed back in a box. I just don't go there. It's just like things happen, stuff happens. It's just the way life is. And so just accept it. Accept it and say, okay. And me being me, I made sure that all the parts were separated and stuff. I didn't want it to get damaged on the way back or anything like that. And so I put it back together, but it was nowhere near as nice as it was the first time I put it together. But my point being in all that is it's okay to fail. It's okay. You don't have to kick yourself and talk about how stupid you are and things like that. It's okay. And you know, I'm on a bit of a roll. My mind is beginning to roll, and it is okay from time to time to call yourself stupid. You know, I was one of the things that I was working on the other day. I was working on it for hours and hours and hours, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I had this thought, and I went, "Oh, you stupid! You should have thought of that earlier." And Mariah was sitting on the couch. I don't know if she remembered, but I said, "Oh, you stupid!" And I went, "Okay, let me fix this," because it's like I'm two people. You know, when I'm telling myself I'm stupid, it's not me anymore. I'm telling somebody else they're stupid. You know, I'm not taking any of this personally. And so I think it's really, really important to, if you're going to break these ideas and thoughts, these, you know, you're going to live in reality, you just have to realize that you know, you're working with damaged goods. You know, we are all damaged goods in some way, shape, or form. And so you've got to learn how to deal with those things and allow those things to happen. And so you know, don't let your past define you. You know, and don't become a negative person just because you've had negative experiences in life. Don't allow life to become this sour, you know, lemon of an experience.
You never want. I couldn't even put a bed in a box on your tombstone. Okay, well, I was going to talk about expectation. We're out of time, but maybe I'll work that into the next podcast. But letting everybody know ahead of time, in 2 weeks, we will be having special services here. So for your those locally, we invite you to come, be a part of it. That will be on a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night.
Yes.
And so we will not be
having... Is that 2 weeks?
It's in 2 weeks. Yeah, it's not next week, but the week after.
Okay, because so that means we won't be having the podcast in two Tuesdays. So next Tuesday we'll have a podcast.
So that's what I'm announcing now, and I will announce it again forthcoming. And you can find more information about that on our website. We'll have the thumbnails up on our YouTube page. We will be streaming them. But these ones, like the last time we did this, we will not keep up. So if you miss them live or in person, you won't get to see them again. So come or tell people about them. And we will see everybody soon. Next week, we will be having our regular podcast. And we'll probably pick up where we left off on this one, talking about expectation. But thanks for joining, and we'll see everybody soon.